Hi, this is David again, and I wanted to do volume two because I think it's an important issue on discrimination, institutionalized discrimination by the Mormon Church. Um, I was raised in California, and I had the uh, unpleasant experience of watching the white man allow the Mexicans to basically jump over the border. In those days, there was no concern over illegal immigrants, etc. um, I remember in Ventura in Santa Barbara, California, in watching these poor immigrants try to come into our country and make some kind of a life for themselves. And I was a member of the Mormon Church. I was in the old Santa Barbara stake and the Ojai Ward. And I was very familiar with the bishops and the authorities of the Mormon Church. And I have to say, honestly, we never heard a word about this kind of discrimination. It was all under the carpet. It was all like it didn't exist. Let me tell you how the white man treated the brown man in the mid 60s, late 60s. I used to watch old school buses that had dilapidated equipment and tires, etc., running towards the fields of strawberries and grapes and orange trees. And they were overloaded, way overloaded, with Mexican families. And the people had no seatbelts because they had no seats. They sat on orange crates going to the fields. And when they got to the fields, there were no bathrooms, there was no water, and basically the family would get out of the bus, and the father would go right into the field as soon as it was daylight, and mom would set up a Coleman stove and try to have food and watch the two or three little children that family had. There was no shade, there was no toys, there was no grass. The children basically played in the dirt in the sunlight. And I remember that Cesar Chavez finally attacked socially the California system and said, wait a minute, we're getting paid 50 cents an hour, and the minimum wage is like back then $5.25. Why aren't we being paid minimum wage? Well, the answer was, you're not citizens. So, but, we're doing the work of citizens, and a long story short, the immigrant plight improved. Sometimes now there were restrooms in the fields so that people were not going to the bathroom on your lettuce, cabbage, and your strawberries. Now there's laws that protect people in the fields. They used to be run over by tractors and hay balers and other types of power equipment, very similar to childhood years ago labor. They were killed and had no medical, no dental, no advantage of a hospital. They couldn't go because they were illegal. And hospitals in those days were not under any obligation to accept anybody they didn't want to accept. Well, a long story short, the Mormon Church, which I was in at that time, was absolutely silent. There was no leadership at all in the Mormon Church saying, whoa, whoa, these people aren't being treated fairly. And I remember being in the Santa Barbara stake and the Ojai Ward for many, many years. I grew up there. I left for college at BYU at 19, 18, and we never had a Mexican in our ward. Then it divided into two wards. We never had a Mexican or a black ever in either one of those wards. And then we would go to state conference, and back in those days, we'd take a sack lunch and we'd sit out on the lawn during the supposed break. And there weren't any blacks. There were no black families. There was no Mexican families. And I didn't notice that. I was just a child. I was raised in the cult, and I just thought everybody in the world was black. It was white, and that blacks and dark-skinned people really only existed in books. Well, the plight of those Mexicans and the way the white man took advantage of them was a really sad moment in human history. Another sad moment in human history is building of our country. The Indian or the Native American was already here on this continent, and they had their teepees, and they hunted buffalo, and they were a peaceful people. And then the white man came. And the white man wanted the buffalo skins, and the white man wanted the Indian land, and continued to push them and push them into the desert until finally the Indians go, whoa, whoa, this isn't right. And they began to attack the white man. And historically, the Mormons, now my reading of the Mormons and the Indians is not as atrocious as some of the other events that were transpired against the Indian race. And the white man basically took over the Indian, put them out on reservations, the worst land in the world. And those people were drunk all the time. White man would bring in liquor, and the Indians would spend their money because they had a miserable life. It's better to get drunk. And then they began to gather the same reputation that blacks gathered in our country, being lazy, being drunk, screwing everything that moves, being dangerous people. It was the white man that pushed that society to the side and didn't educate them, etc. Well, I remember the early 60s very, very well. I drove, as I mentioned, I think on tape 1, through the South. And I saw the houses that were shanties and shacks. I saw how the black people were treated in this country. I saw going into towns, it said no colored. No colored served at the restaurants and at the 7-Elevens and stores of convenience. And I would go to a gas station. There would be 3 bathrooms. It would be male, female, and colored. And the colored bathrooms were never cleaned, and if there was a break in the toilet or the sink, it was just left. And that reinforced the white man's opinion that blacks were dirty and violent, and that they wouldn't clean up after themselves. Well, the gas station attendants didn't clean that bathroom. I was alive when George Wallace stood in front of the school of separate but equal philosophy. And the little black kids that were just trying to get into school, they couldn't get in. And George Wallace was the governor and keeping the little black kids out. So eventually, through the federal government, certainly not state governments, federal government laws, 64 Civil Rights Act, etc., blacks and brown were allowed to go to universities and choose for themselves what schools. Well, the discrimination didn't stop. The Ku Klux Klan is still a viable organization right now, and skinheads in the United States. Little families would come home from church and dad was hanging outside dead on a tree. What the hell kind of a country was this? And is it? Because some of these things, perhaps not as overt, are still going on. And so I have a lot of empathy and sympathy for dark-skinned people, brown-skinned people, black people, and people that come from Asia or the Middle East and other places that are just looking for a better life and willing to work for it. Those Mexican people work day and night for their money, and now they have cars, now they have houses, and now they're becoming a political force in the United States, and it's the fault of the white man. Now he wants them all pushed back into Mexico because he's used them and abused them, and they have no more use to him because the white man is very good technically. He's very poor socially, but the machines now have taken a lot of those jobs from the Mexicans. And I need to sometimes look at my notes because I'm old. One of the things I wanted to mention about the Mormon Church was there doesn't seem to be any leadership. There really has not been any contribution of the Mormons to society. And as a matter of fact, the Mormon contribution to any society, I don't care if it's Europe, Asia, South America, the United States, is negative. It's negative. Their polygamy and the breakups of families and the hatred of the FLDS, which I've studied the FLDS, they are the true Mormons. they believe in the original tenets of Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, and came right on down to John Taylor when they basically broke off. And they use the same Book of Mormon, the same scriptures, the same songbooks, the same meetings. They're identical to the Mormon Church, other than they may have 4 or 5 wives and 15 or 20 children, and they seem to be supported from what I've seen. The idea that everyone is on welfare, that's not true. That's not true. I've taken lessons with the FLDS and in their homes. And they're dentists, they're doctors, they're prominent people in the community. So from its inception, Joseph Smith printing money in Kirtland was certainly no leadership. He was counterfeiting, and he absconded out of town with mostly Mormons chasing him who had given him money. And there's a long history of disobeying the law and pushing brown skin and black people to the outskirts of life. The Book of Mormon, good Lord, if you read that thing at all, it says incredibly stupid things. That brown people, the Lamanites, which we now know don't even exist by DNA, they're people who came out of Asia. We've never found a sword, a breastplate, or any evidence archaeologically that these people ever existed. But the Book of Mormon insists that they did. And when they heard the gospel and they obeyed the prophet, they turned white. Now that's an amazing thing. Have you ever seen a black person turn white? Well, all of us have seen genes before a baby is born between mixed marriages. What about a living brown or black person? Maybe Michael Jackson. I don't know. But the Book of Mormon is just hateful towards brown people and black people, and the curse of Cain, and it goes on and on and on. I am so ashamed of the American way of treating the blacks, going over and getting them out of their families and coming to the United States as slaves, and then selling them like property. And then the southern states certainly use them for plantations. And I would think, as a normal human being, that if they had not been picking cotton and helping the southern states, the United States would look very different today. The South would be even more poor than it is today. So my heart goes out to brown people and to black people, and I think the Mormon Church has been disgusting concerning these people. Their prophets are not prophets. When these insane policies and prejudice kinds of actions were going on, no prophet of Jesus Christ stood up and said, whoa, this isn't right. The prophets kept the blacks in prison until 1978. You believe in the Mormon Church, you believe in prophets, and this is the way they treated the brothers and sisters of all the people of the world. So take that as you may. I remember when Deseret News published hundreds, if not thousands, of names in 1978 when I was at BYU of people objecting and leaving the church because Spencer Kimball said, gee, let's give black people the right to be part of be a full fellowship in the Mormon Church. So, in conclusion, I don't want to get cut off again by the video, but my heart goes out. And those of you that are brown-skinned, I have 2 brown-skinned children, and I know the discrimination and the hatred at times, and I have to teach them. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope this has been somewhat helpful to whoever reads it or watches it. Thank you very much. Bye.